Welcome back to Reynolds Runabouts, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Reynolds, and today I'm going to take the twisted Kingplank. Even though I did steam and rebend it in the last episode, it still has a little bit of a twist, which supports my theory that I'm going to have to use epoxy in addition to fasteners. And what I'm going to do, this blue tape delineates where I don't want the epoxy to go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wet this out with straight epoxy and get that so it's wet. And what that does is it keeps the epoxy that I put on next with the Kingplank that has the binding agents in it to make it like hardcore glue. This will help it not absorb that resin out of my glue mixture and then just leaving me with fibers that don't have any sticking power. So I'm going to apply the just straight epoxy to that, and then I'm going to do it to the Kingplank itself. The goal is to encapsulate the Kingplank, which is lumber, not plywood, encapsulate it completely in epoxy. My goal is to prevent it from moving with moisture and heat. That should help keep the moisture out of it. And then when it's attached to the plywood, which does not move, plywood does not move very much, if at all, it will keep that plank from stretching to and fro against this and then breaking that glue joint and then leaving a crack like when I found it. So the goal is to make this deck, including the Kingplank, one entire piece. And once the Kingplank is on, epoxied, glued on, and dried, I will go ahead and then put the stain on, and then I'll epoxy the entire deck. So it'll be an epoxy deck, and the Kingplank will be encapsulated. So theoretically, expansion should not happen. So back to work. So what I'm going to do here is just apply the straight epoxy over the whole interior surface or the bottom of this plank. And then when I do the stain and then epoxy on top, that will complete the encapsulation on the top section of that. So I'm going to just go ahead and put it in all areas on the bottom. Everything I can see has to get at least one coat of this straight epoxy. And then I'll go ahead, when I do the affixing or with the thickened epoxy with the binder, that will go in this area here, which sits flush with the deck, creating a glue joint. And we should have a pretty good package after that. This I will wait and do stain on when I do the stain. I want to make sure I leave that open so it's stained. And yeah, I'll finish that up and then we'll get it on the boat. I have the Kingplank underside in the joint all coated in epoxy, and I looked for dry spots because the dry spots are where the adhesive here. If I see dry spots, it'll draw my resin filler mixture, it'll draw the resin out of it. It looks really good. I've got a nice coat on there, but not enough where it's dripping all over because I want to put it back on this deck, which has tape, but you don't want to get a lot of extra stuff lying around. And as soon as I get this on there and I'm happy with it, clamped and fastened, I will go ahead and pull that tape so that I don't have the hard task of getting that resin stuck tape off that joint. And if I have to, I could always light sand it before I do this, before I put the stain coat on. So with this, I use a mask because it's the West System 404. It's high density adhesive filler. And what I have extra resin, so I didn't have to go back and make another batch. So I'll just simply add, I use little scoops like this with a mask on because you don't want to breathe that stuff in. And I'll mix a mixture like peanut butter, and then I'll start putting it into that joint with my brush. And then we'll go ahead and put the clamps and screw on and pull the tape. Now that that part is done, and safely take my mask off, I'm going to put the peanut butter texture on with my brush. I'm going to put it in the seam because this is the only place I want glue to interact with the plywood. I have tape on the inside of each frame. I have plastic down so none of this ends up in the bilge of the boat that is freshly varnished. And we should have a pretty clean application. And then I will, when this is on, there'll be squeeze out, which is a positive. I want to see squeeze out. That means I've got the joint filled completely. And then I'll go ahead, clean that, I'll clean up my squeeze out with a little spatula. I'm going to try to get a 90-degree angle on the glue instead of maybe a fillet. We'll see what happens. A fillet wouldn't be the worst. It just wouldn't look original to have a little fillet there between this plank and the plywood. The plywood is also, because it's going to get, all of this is going to get a coat of clear resin, the high performance TotalBoat, just to, to seal in the stain, so that'll make it easier for me to not only build up the surface very fast, meaning the grain, and not, 9 or 10 coats of varnish. I'll be able to do that with epoxy like I did on some of the other pieces already. And then repeat what had been done to this deck originally, and not originally from the factory, but whoever restored this boat last did put epoxy on the majority of it, meaning the deck and the interior, and it did a really good job of preserving the boat. So I don't have any trouble going back and doing that again, especially knowing that it worked. And with proper care, it should continue to work. And this deck has, I don't think it has any more sanding left. It's reached the end of its life, where the next deck job will probably be a replacement. And I'm hoping that this epoxy will give it even more life than varnish would. So you only need to put the adhesive if you put enough of it on one surface. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on there, and we'll get the clamps on, start putting the silicone bronze screws back in from front to back so that this twist will hopefully get out. And then we'll go ahead and put this to bed, and I'll do some cleanup and get that tape out of there so we don't have to worry about any more mess than we already have. Looks like I'm getting a good squeeze out. I might even put a little more up here, because this is the area where the twist is the worst. It might not be remedied by any of the work I've done, but it's going to be really close. I'll put a little extra there. But I see lots of epoxy in there, so I'm pretty happy with that already. All right. The clamp on the front is the most important. This is where the twist is most noticeable. And what I've got to do is get it in the notch that's been created with just the different parts of this boat. I want to get that port edge down, which it's doing, and the starboard edge goes down pretty easy on its own. No gap there. secure this with a smaller clamp just to keep it lined up. And start applying the screws. I don't want anything, I don't want it to be out of whack, and then it'll be, it's been pre-drilled. You can see the squeeze out, that's good. And I'm hoping to get the same when I put the screws in, so I'll start to do that. I found that the front needs a longer set of screws. This is the dilemma I face with this one, is that I have to move my clamp to really get in there and do a good job. There we go. I wish the steaming and bending had worked out, but it didn't. And I just have to move on. Focus on this side, because that's kind of where the work starts. Now just work back. Nice tight fit. Lots of good squeeze out. I love when every time you put a fastener in, you see the squeeze out. Really shows you that it's got sticking power now. And there we are. Last fastener. That sit. I'll put the clamps on just for a backup. And we'll let that sit for 24 hours. And let that epoxy do its job. That will do it for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you're a subscriber. If you're not, please hit the subscribe button to receive notifications. The videos come out every 2 weeks on Wednesday mornings. If you're enjoying the series enough to hit the like button, great. Thank you very much. I always appreciate the positive feedback from those thumbs up. And if you'd like to leave a comment, both positive and questioning, please do so. I'm up for the challenge. Please send those along. And I will see you in a couple weeks when we will be doing the final finish on the deck, which I think you'll really enjoy seeing how the boat comes together as we get really close to finishing this project. Take care.